Are you ready to uncover the darkest secrets of antiquity? Today, we will dive into the deep gnosis of the cruelest gods worshipped by the ancient Canaanites. These gods, feared and revered, left a legacy of terror and mystery that continues to resonate today. The Canaanites, a civilization that inhabited the Levant region, worshipped deities that were neither compassionate nor merciful. These entities demanded sacrifices and ruled over their followers with brutal power. Over time, these deities were associated with demonology, considered dark and evil forces. The worship of these gods was enveloped in bloody rituals and esoteric practices designed to appease their wrath and gain their favor, but at an extremely high cost. Today, we will unveil these hidden secrets, exploring the legends and terrifying truths surrounding these Canaanite deities. Who were these gods really? What kind of power did they wield over their followers? And what lessons can we draw from their dark and mysterious cult? Prepare yourself for a journey into the heart of the most sinister esotericism. Each revelation will take us deeper into the mind and soul of the ancient Canaanites, unraveling knowledge that challenges our modern understanding. Let's begin. Moloch, the feared god of child sacrifices. Imagine a dark and mysterious valley on the outskirts of Jerusalem. In this place, known as the Valley of Ben Hinnom, the ancient Canaanites carried out rituals that today seem unimaginable. Horrifying sacrifices in honor of a feared and revered deity named Moloch. Moloch, mentioned in the Bible as a god to whom human sacrifices were made, is a figure shrouded in mystery and horror. Although his name resonates in sacred texts, archaeological records shed little light on him. Moloch, whose name likely derives from the Hebrew word melech, king, was a figure of dark power. For a long time, it was thought that Moloch was another name for Milcom, the deity of the Ammonites, but more recent research suggests that Moloch could have been a title or epithet rather than a proper name. Like other cultures in the region, the ancient Canaanites referred to their gods as kings of various domains. An example is Malkandros, another name for El, the chief god of the Canaanite pantheon, meaning king of man. An intriguing theory suggests that Moloch could have been Baal Adad or Hadad, the king of the Canaanite gods. In the same valley where children were unlived, the prophet Jeremiah mentions altars dedicated to Baal, and Assyrian texts speak of child sacrifices to Adad, the Assyrian equivalent of Hadad. This suggests a mysterious and dark connection between these gods and human sacrifices. The sacrifices in honor of Moloch were known as passing through the fire. They were carried out in a sanctuary called Tophet, just outside the walls of Jerusalem. Although some believe this practice was introduced with foreign deities, it is also possible that the ancient Judeans believed they were sacrificing to Yahweh. Regardless of the intention, the biblical prophets harshly condemned these rituals, seeing them as an abomination in the eyes of Yahweh. These rituals were not exclusive to Canaan. Similar sacrifices were performed in Carthage, a city founded by Phoenician settlers. A sacred grove and a temple were dedicated to these rites, suggesting a cultural connection between Canaanite and Carthaginian practices. Although some experts debate this connection, the similarities are undeniable. A ferocious aspect of the worship of Moloch is its association with the torture of the bull, an infamous method of execution known as the brazen bull, used in Sicily. This device, a bronze statue shaped like a bull, was used to cruelly torture and unalive victims. People were locked inside the hollow bull, and a fire was lit underneath, heating the metal until the victims were literally, well, you know. Their agony resonated through tubes in the bull's head, creating a sound similar to the bellowing of an enraged bull. Today, Moloch remains a figure of fascination and fear. Some theories suggest that some elites worship this deity in the modern era. It is said that influential figures worship Moloch in secret circles. The Bohemian Club, for example, has been the subject of numerous conspiracy theories about the modern worship of Moloch. It is rumored that the most influential people gather to commit atrocities in the name of this god, seeking power, money, and fame. Among the members of this club are allegedly Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon, among other high government officials and Hollywood stars. If you want to know more about these theories and the possible contemporary worship of Moloch, research the Bohemian Club and the horrors that are said to occur there. If you are interested in this topic, perhaps we will make a video about it in the future. Now, let's move on to the next god. Mot, the god of death and the underworld. Mot, also known as Maweth, is the god of death and the underworld in Canaanite mythology. He represents an inevitable and relentless force, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the certainty of death. His dominion over the underworld and his voracious appetite make him a feared and respected figure by gods and humans. It is often described with a grotesque and terrifying appearance, suitable for his role as the god of death. Imagine a tall, skeletal figure with withered, dry skin stretched over his prominent bones. His face is a mask of terror, with sunken eyes that seem like bottomless pits and a disproportionately large mouth, always open, displaying rows of sharp, blade-like teeth. His hair is tangled and dirty, and his presence exudes a smell of rot and decomposition. Stories describe him with bony hands and long claws, capable of grabbing and devouring anyone who crosses his path. His appearance reflects his greedy nature and his role as a devourer of souls. He is described as a greedy god, always hungry and never satisfied. This characteristic makes him a brutal representation of death, a power that consumes without discrimination, affecting everyone equally. Mot not only devours humans, but also other gods, highlighting his power and relentless cruelty. His insatiable hunger symbolizes the inevitability of death, a fate from which no one can escape. The most famous myth involving Mot is his confrontation with Baal, the god of storms and fertility. In this tale, Mot challenges Baal and drags him into the underworld, causing droughts and disasters on earth. The battle between Baal and Mot represents the eternal cycle of life and death, fertility and desolation. Although Baal is eventually resurrected, Mot's presence ensures that death will always have its place in the cycle of existence. He is not only a god of death, but also a figure representing the underworld, a dark realm where the souls of the dead reside. His abode is a feared place, filled with shadows and terror, where spirits find restless rest under his rule. This underworld reflects the Canaanite perception of death, inevitable, unfathomable, and eternally hungry. The cruelty of this god extends beyond his insatiable hunger. In some stories, he is described as reveling in the suffering of both the living and the dead, delighting in the despair his presence provokes. His ruthless character and lack of mercy make him one of the most feared figures in the Canaanite pantheon. In ceremonies and rituals, the ancient Canaanites sought to appease Mot, to avoid his wrath and protect themselves from his voracity. With his unyielding dominion over death and the underworld, he embodies the harshness of existence and the certainty of the end that we all face. His story and his cult reflect the deep fear and reverence that the ancient Canaanites felt towards the relentless power of death. Baal, the lord of storms and fertility. Baal, one of the most prominent deities of the Canaanite pantheon, was essential to the lives of the region's ancient peoples. Associated with storms, fertility, and agriculture, Baal was worshipped for his ability to provide rain and ensure the fertility of the land. The Canaanites, dependent on the seasons and harvests, saw Baal as a protector and provider, guaranteeing the continuity of life through his blessings. Baal's influence extended beyond Canaan, and he was also revered in neighboring cultures of the ancient Near East. His name, which means Lord or Owner, reflects his authority and power over natural elements. Inscriptions and artifacts found at archaeological sites demonstrate his prominence and the devotion he received. However, the worship of this god was not without its brutal and fearsome practices. In times of drought, natural disasters, or calamities, rituals dedicated to Baal could become incredibly cruel. To appease his wrath and ensure his favor, human sacrifices were performed, a practice that reveals the dark and ruthless side of his cult. These sacrifices were necessary to restore balance and obtain God's blessings. One of the darkest aspects of this god's worship is the practice of child sacrifices. In desperation, the Canaanites sacrificed their children, hoping that Baal would respond to their pleas and bring the much-needed rain. This act was seen as a last resort to save the community from famine and death. The brutality of these rituals has been documented in various ancient texts. It is harshly criticized in the Bible, where the Hebrew prophets condemn the worship of Baal and its practices. Despite this, the cult of Baal persisted for centuries, showing the deep influence and fear that this deity inspired in its worshippers. Baal was also connected with other aspects of Canaanite life. His role as a fertility god meant that he controlled the rains and the fecundity of animals and humans. Festivals and rituals in his honor included celebrations to thank him for his gifts and request the continuation of his favor. In addition to his importance in ancient Canaan, Baal has also left a mark in demonology. In medieval Christian tradition, he was demonized and transformed into an infernal figure. In demonological texts, he is portrayed as a high-ranking demon in hell, a grotesque and monstrous entity that rules with cruelty. He is described with multiple heads, sometimes of a man, bull, and ram, symbolizing his power and fearsome nature. This transformation of Baal from a respected god to a terrifying demon reflects how later cultures interpreted and condemned the religious practices of their predecessors. Resheph, the god of plague and war. Resheph, a feared deity in the Canaanite pantheon, is the god of plague and war. His name evokes images of disease and destruction, and his presence is synonymous with death and chaos. Unlike other gods who could bring blessings and prosperity, Resheph is seen as an unstoppable and ruthless force whose purpose is to sow terror and desolation. This god is often depicted as a fierce and terrifying warrior. Imagine a tall, robust figure with powerful muscles, reflecting his strength in combat. His skin is pale, almost translucent, as if permanently shadowed by death. His eyes, fiery and piercing, seem to reflect the fever's fire and the fury of war. His hair appears aflame in some depictions, suggesting his connection with destruction and fire. His face is marked by an implacable and severe expression, devoid of compassion or mercy. He is frequently shown with a crown of coiled snakes around his head, symbolizing the poison and mortality he brings. His large, strong hands hold a bow and arrows, tools of his power to unleash diseases and death from afar. The arrows, often described as poisoned, represent the rapid and painful spread of the plague. Resheph's cruelty is manifested in his association with pestilence and war, two of the most destructive and feared forces in the ancient world. It was believed that Resheph had the power to unleash devastating epidemics, wiping out entire communities with uncontrollable diseases. The pestilences brought by Resheph were seen as divine punishments, and their impact was both physical and psychological, as the mere mention of his name could instill panic and despair. He was also a god of war, reveling in bloodshed and destruction on the battlefield. Warriors invoked his name for strength and ferocity, but also feared his wrath, as his favor was as volatile as it was deadly. War under the banner of Resheph not only meant the defeat of the enemy, but also the spread of diseases among the survivors, prolonging suffering and agony long after the battles had ended. In times of plague, the rituals dedicated to this god were particularly grim and eerie. The Canaanites performed sacrifices, often of animals and occasionally humans, to appease the god and pray for the end of the plague. These sacrifices were bloody and desperate, reflecting the people's helplessness in the face of this deity's destructive power. The bloodshed in his honor was seen as an attempt to satiate his insatiable thirst for destruction and death. Resheph's brutality is amplified by his connection with other deities of war and plague in different cultures of the ancient Near East. His name appears in Egyptian texts where he is identified with similar gods, such as Seth, and in Ugaritic inscriptions, highlighting his role as a bringer of calamities. His presence in these cultures underscores his reputation as an implacable force of devastation whose influence extended beyond the borders of Canaan. Resheph embodies the cruelty and unpredictability of plagues and war. His grotesque figure and association with disease and death make him a feared and respected deity, a constant reminder of life's fragility and the relentless power of nature. The ancient Canaanites sought to protect themselves from his wrath through rituals and sacrifices, albeit always aware that Resheph's shadow could fall upon them at any moment. Anat, the bloodthirsty warrior goddess. Anat, also known as Anath, is a warrior goddess in Canaanite mythology, renowned for her fierce nature and association with war. As Baal's sister, she shared his power and presence in the Canaanite pantheon, but was distinguished by her brutality and bloodthirstiness. Anat was a protector and a deity who embodied violence and destruction in their purest form. This figure is depicted as strong and majestic, with a terrifying beauty that reflects both her power and ferocity. She is often shown armed with a spear and a bow, ready for combat. Her body is adorned with armor and war jewels, and her intense gaze reveals her relentless determination. In some depictions, Anat wears a crown of horns, symbolizing her divine status and connection with strength and wild nature. Anat's cruelty is highlighted in numerous myths that narrate her exploits on the battlefield. One of the most famous stories describes how Anat, in a frenzy of rage, massacres large numbers of enemies. In this myth, her thirst for vengeance is so great that she does not stop until all her adversaries lie dead at her feet. Anat not only settles for victory, but also decorates her temple with the remains of her enemies, using their heads and limbs as macabre trophies. This act of ritualized violence not only demonstrates her power, but also her enjoyment of destruction and chaos. Anat embodies the brutality of ancient warfare. Her relentless bloodlust and ability to annihilate her enemies mercilessly make her a feared and respected deity. In Canaanite myths, she is often described as bathing in the blood of her enemies, a ritual that symbolizes her purification and readiness for future battles. This image of Anat, bathed in blood, highlights her bloodthirsty nature and her role as a goddess of war. In another story, Anat descends to the underworld to rescue her brother, Baal, showing her bravery and willingness to face any danger to protect her family. During this mission, Anat confronts and defeats the Underworld Guardians, once again showcasing her lethal ability and unbreakable determination. Her influence extended beyond the battlefield. As a warrior goddess, she was also invoked to protect cities and their inhabitants, and sacrifices were performed in her honor to ensure her favor and protection. These rituals, often bloody, reflected the need to appease her violent nature and secure her support in times of war. Anat's ferocity and role as a goddess of war have left an indelible mark on Canaanite mythology. Her figure, both feared and revered, symbolizes the duality of war, protection and destruction, power and cruelty. With her terrifying beauty and thirst for blood, Anat remains one of the most fascinating and terrifying deities in the Canaanite pantheon. Conclusion. Through the Canaanite pantheon, we have explored the figures of Moloch, Baal, Resheph, and Anat, each representing dark and terrible aspects of both human and divine existence. These deities, with their bloody rituals and merciless practices, reveal a vision of humanity that is both fascinating and terrifying. From the child sacrifices in honor of Moloch, through the devastating wars of Baal, the relentless pestilences of Resheph, to the warrior brutality of Anat, these gods encapsulate the constant struggle between life and death, fertility and destruction, protection and cruelty. It's easy to view these gods as mere personifications of human barbarism and violence. However, they represent something much deeper and more complex. Like many other cultures, the ancient Canaanites attempted to understand and control the uncontrollable forces of nature and human life through their beliefs and rituals. Moloch, Baal, Resheph, and Anat were not simply cruel monsters, but reflections of the brutal reality surrounding them. They were symbols of hope, fear, devotion, despair, and life in its raw, authentic, and ruthless form. These gods compel us to confront the darkest part of our nature. They remind us that the capacity to create and destroy, to love and hate, to protect and harm, is inherently intertwined in the fabric of humanity. By worshipping these deities, the Canaanites acknowledged and respected the duality of existence, the eternal struggle between the forces of life and death. They teach us that violence and cruelty are not merely external, but also reside in the human heart. The real reflection is whether we can recognize these facets in ourselves and learn from them to seek a balance that honors our strengths and shadows. If this journey through the Canaanite deities and their stories has fascinated you, we invite you to continue exploring with us on our channel. Subscribe and like this video for more content on esoteric and dark history. See you in the next video. See you in the next.